What's up, my Empyrean ready egg fruits? This is Rob from Gay Guy Plays, and today on the Daily Grind, we continue our preparation series by ranking Empyrean weapons, more specifically arc guns. Now, I do have a couple disclaimers that go along with this. First and foremost, this list is technically opinion based, so don't be mad if some of your favorite weapons end up towards the bottom of the list, while some that you did not quite get along with end up a little bit higher. Now, I do have some confessions here. There are some weapons that are down towards the bottom that I have very strong emotional ties with, and it pained me to put them down there. However, I didn't feel like their performance was where I wanted them to be. Now, continuing on with that thought process, we are going to be focusing on the performance of these weapons in an Empyrean context, aka flying around in Arcwing. Now, for those of you guys who are unaware, arc guns actually have two different sets of stats, one for atmospheric combat and one when you're out in Arcwing. Now, there are some weapons that have definitely made their name in ground combat, but for the most part, we're going to be using these weapons flying around in space, and then when we get into like ship-to-ship combat, when we're actually boarding ships, we'll most likely be using our primaries, secondaries, and melees. So I'm focusing on the Arcwing portion of these weapons. And last, I do need to give you guys a little bit of forewarning. I'm a tad bit upset today, and I think many other adults out there will feel me on this topic. There is nothing more terrifying than opening up a 12-pack of toilet paper, pulling out that first roll and realizing how bad the quality of that toilet paper is, and then realizing you're gonna have to go through 12 more rolls of that, for lack of a better term, shitty toilet paper. So that's the mood that I'm in today. Let's go ahead and start judging these arc guns. Now, I do want you guys to be aware, I did actually go through and level and reforma some of these weapons, mainly because of the fact that there are new mods that are floating around there, like critical focus, sabot rounds, and marked targets. Like all of those ones, I kind of wanted to see where the builds would fare for those. So definitely keep that in mind. I've been playing with these fairly recently, and some of them were far more painful than others, starting with the worst of the bunch, which of course is the Corvus. Now, like I was stating earlier, there are some weapons that have made their name in ground combat, and the Corvus has a really, really high base critical chance. A lot of people were using this to take out profit taker legs. Me personally, I don't feel like you need specific weapons for that unless you're really ill-equipped. I don't know, that's just me. Maybe, you know, I put a little bit more work into my builds on these arc guns than other people do. I'm just not saying anything, I'm just saying. But when it comes to Arcwing combat, the Corvus, oh my. Okay, so the way that this weapon works is basically, it's got a charge function. You can tap it to let out a burst, which is actually a fairly tight spread of pellets. Of course, that's not full damage. However, you can hold it down a little bit longer, and what'll end up happening is each of the pellets will deal more damage, but I do believe that the spread increases. So it's nice if you're kind of like taking on a cloud of enemies to do a nice big charge up, but of course that does take time, and you do have to kind of have a good placement of enemies for that to be efficient. Me personally, I fucking hate this with like all my heart and soul. I feel like when you're out in space, you're not necessarily up in people's faces when it comes to the combat with this. I guess if you like to use your melee, your arc melee a lot, then maybe this would be a good pairing for that. But me personally, I'm using my arc melee just to close gaps, but if I'm, you know, fighting standardly, I'm going to be fighting them at range, and this one I just don't feel performs well enough for me, especially because of the fact that it is like a semi-auto. It's like tap, 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 tap. That's also not my favorite. So for me, the Corvus is the lowest on my list, and I pray to God that I never have to level that one ever again. Now this next weapon, I think it's going to trigger some people because I know it's a favorite. And in fact, it used to be one of my favorites. I would often pair the Velocitus with an Itzal, and I would hide out on certain interception points, and I would actually snipe other interception points to stop enemies from capturing it. Like, it was just a whole lot of fun. It's got great critical chance, it's got great status chance, and it deals a ton of magnetic damage. So that's what a lot of people love. A lot of people love those huge numbers and being able to snipe enemies from super duper far away. That's fun, but often when it comes to standard Warframe play, you're taking on hordes of enemies and you want to take down a lot of them at a time. And the Velocitus suffers the same way that a lot of other sniper weapons suffer. Yes, they can output a shit ton of damage on a single target, but there's nothing in Warframe that is so difficult that you need to output those high damage numbers. So for me, the Velocitus, at least at this point in time, from, you know, standard Arcwing play, it's not, I know, and trust me, my eyes lit up thinking of using it with the It's All Again and just hiding out and sniping enemies down. And that brings joy to my heart, but not enough joy to put it higher on my list. Now, this next weapon, oh, when we talk about ground combat versus Arcwing combats, oh, it hurts my soul because I love this weapon. Look at how gorgeous the Phaedra is. It is, I would like to say it's the most beautiful of all of the Arcwing weapons, but as you guys know, while I do feel it's appropriate to be dressed to kill, being pretty is not enough to always get the job done. And unfortunately, if we take a look at one of the glaring issues with this, you're going to be fighting enemies in space at far distances, and you only have like a 10.5 accuracy. Ooh, it's painful. Legitimately, you might be pretty, and this might be the casting couch, but literally, you're like shooting on the wall, cameras, on the carpet, but you're not really hitting your target. At least not much of your load is. So me personally, as much as I think the Phaedra is fantastic, as much as I think it's beautiful, and it's actually really good in ground combat, I was playing around with it against, you know, our standard 165 Billy, and it was able to strip armor really, really well and like really lay into them. So me personally, it's great for that, but when it comes to Arcwing combat, this is just not my jam. It's got a good amount of status on it, but it's just not enough. It makes me sad. Alright, moving along. This one I'm going to get heat for. I'm going to get a lot of heat for, because I know that a lot of starter Arcwing players or players who don't really do Arcwing as much, this is definitely a go-to. And this is something that I would recommend to a lot of Arcwing players that are just beginning. The Fluctis is number one. It's got a ton of cool factor to it. So for those of you guys who've never shot a Fluctis in your life, it basically charges up the front panel and it releases a blade wave. So think of this as Excalibur's Exalted Blade, but on a gun. It's absolutely fantastic in that way, and it's great for hitting multiple enemies at once. However, you do have to be aware that this is projectile based, so it does have a travel time, and it is linear. Oh, I just covered my mouth with that. But basically what ends up happening is you have this line of where you can hit enemies. Stat-wise, it's only got a 10% status, and it's got a 15% critical chance, so it's not the worst, but it's definitely not the best out there. Again, it's really, really good if you do want to clear out a point. And I think that that is very, you know, that's something that you need to be aware of. Also, I do believe that it has a... Oh, I'm not even going to say it. I'm not going to say it because I'm not 100% sure. But for me personally, this is great for somebody who's just starting out. I know it's a fan favorite. I know it looks really, really fucking cool. But when you're taking on enemies from afar because of the fact that they are flying and because of the fact that it is just linear, I personally am rating this like fairly low on the list. I think this is 1, 2, 3, 4 from the bottom. So it's kind of like in the middle-ish of our list. So don't hate me. That's just where I stand. Now, one of the things you'll notice is I did not put the Imperator on this list. And that's because we have the Imperator Vandal. And I'm not, like, the Imperator would just be at the very, very bottom of this list because it's just, I don't like it. But the Imperator Vandal, one of the things I have to state is this reminds me very much of the Bratton Prime. And I believe that the Imperator is kind of like smack dab in the middle of our lists. Imperator Vandal, number one, it's just a great balance of weapon. It's got a good fire rate to it. It's fairly accurate, so you can go ahead and take out enemies from afar. It's got a good, like, it's just overall good. I wouldn't say it's the best out there, but it does feel very much like I'm using a Bratton Prime. It's just overall a great balanced weapon. Also great for somebody who's a bit starting out. Of course, I believe that these drop off of the Fomorian. Whenever there's a Fomorian thread out there, that's when you're going to want to jump in and get your hands on these. Also, of course, this is the Vandal version, so it's super hyper ultra metallic, which is pretty. Not as pretty as the Phaedra, but more effective than the Phaedra. So a part of me is like, listen, we got a straight shooter here, we might as well give it a little bit of credit. So that's why it's towards the middle of the list. In fact, let's see where we're at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's actually smack dab 5 on the list. Is there 10, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? No, there's 9. There's 9 on the list, but it's in the middle. So Imperator Vandal is 5 out of the 9 on our list. That sounds really, really awkward. Anyway, continuing on, we have the Grattler. This weapon, I like, but I also don't like. Now, first and foremost, you have to keep in mind that if you are going to be using this in Sharkwing, be very careful in close areas because you can deal self-damage to yourself, which I am not very fond of whatsoever. However, it does have a slight bonus when it comes to Sharkwing. Now, for those of you guys who don't know how the Grattler works, basically it shoots out a projectile. The, what do you call this? The initial impact of that projectile is damage. So it deals damage, but it also has an explosion that happens afterwards. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that it has an innate 5-meter punch through. So if that enemy is traveling and gets out of the range of the explosion, because you got to keep in mind, here's the enemy, here's the bullet, it's going through, and then boom, there's an explosion. So if that enemy is still moving, if it's getting out of the way, it's not going to be caught in the explosion. And Sabbat rounds adds another 3 meters to punch through, so you get a little bit more of an issue there. However, one of the things I do like about the Grattler is very similarly to the Fluctis. Remember when I was saying, oh, it's a nice like little beginner weapon because, you know, you've got a wide space to hit your enemies with. This, of course, has that explosion at the very, very end where it does an additional like instance of damage. So if you don't hit them with the initial instance of damage, you also get that secondary explosion. So that's always nice. Just keep in mind that this does have a limited range to it. In fact, I think the Fluctis does too. That's what I was going to say earlier. I'll put it like in a pinned comment. Or no, I'll put it in the description box because I forgot to write it down, which makes me sad, but that's where we're at. So that is something to keep in mind. Self-damage, it also has that first initial instance and then the explosion that comes afterwards. So do keep that in mind as well. But if you're in Sharkwing, what you can actually do is you can have this collide with terrain. So it'll have the explosion there, which is kind of nice because you can get that punch through and then you can get the explosion off of the terrain, which is always nice. So that is an additional bonus. But again, it's got a great critical chance and it's also got a great status chance to go along with it. So me personally, I think the Grattler is kind of like the step up from the Fluctis. All right, I feel like that's where if you're maybe not the greatest shot in space, that's where you're gonna want to move to. Now, the next weapon. I'm quite fond of this weapon. I didn't realize how fond I was of this weapon until I started playing around with it on stream, and that's actually the Larkspur. Oh my god, it's not matching. Hold on. We need to just make sure real quick. Let's just make it match. It's not 100% perfect, but there we are. The Larkspur. So this is what I like to refer to as the big dick gun. I mean, you see what I see, right? You see what I see, right? It's there. I'm just saying. But the great thing about this weapon is, first and foremost, it is a beam weapon. So it is the first space beam weapon ever. And I do feel like it's pretty, what's the word I want to say? I feel like it is a bit forgiving with its beam shot, if you know what I mean. It kind of like, it'll lean to your target a little bit, or the beam is girthier than we realize, and apparently it'll also chain to other targets. Now I'm gonna be honest, in space, it's not as chainy mainly because of the fact that targets are a little bit more spaced out. But if you do have something like the Amisha where you can slow down targets and they kind of cluster, it's really, really good for that. So I really, really enjoy this one. But in addition to that, it's got the secondary, which is a charge. So you actually use your secondary button to toggle between the two, and you basically fire off this blob. Now, the beam does have a limited range to it. I'll leave it in the description as well, or maybe a pinned comment description. But I will go ahead and leave that there so that you guys can see where the limitation of these beams are. But I do feel like it's got a good distance on the beam, but it's not the best distance. However, you can use the charge shot to hit enemies from really far away. And when I was using the, when I was playing around with the different boxes for interception, I was actually sniping enemies with that projectile, enemies that were just kind of floating there in the same spot. I was able to take them out pretty easily with that explosion orb, and it deals a good amount of damage too. So for me, you've got some short range combat where you can kind of clear areas that might be a little bit more populated, and then you also have the ability to, if you want to kind of snipe an enemy, you can go ahead and use that secondary fire, or the charge fire as you would say. And on ground combat, this is a really, really good weapon too. So all in all, I feel like it's a great overall, and that's why it's pretty high. In fact, this is technically in the top 3 of the weapons that we're talking about today. So this one definitely gets a thumbs up from me. Now, the next one that I'm super duper fond of, and I used to not be fond of it. It used to be so bad. It used to be so bad, but it is highly improved. So if you used it in the past and you're like, Rob, what are you talking about? The dual Decurion is trash. It's actually a lot better now. It feels really, really like fucking good when you're out in space. I feel like you can definitely snipe enemies with this out there. It's got a good critical chance to it. It's got a good fire rate. It definitely feels like you can clear out spots with it because of the fact that you can just kind of like mow them down with this weapon. And it's really cool to have dual pistols in space. It's just like, it's so freaking awesome. Again, it doesn't feel complex. There's nothing like juggling, different fire modes, or having to work around, the punch through, or the the distance away you are from an enemy. You can just mow them down with something simple and absolutely fucking beautiful like the dual Decurion. There's really not too much to say about this except for the fact that I quite enjoy using it. And it's not complicated. It's just a gun, and you shoot the shit out of your enemies, and that makes me very happy. So that's it. I think that this is the most improved too. Probably the most improved weapon out there, because before it was absolutely unusable, where it would recoil so much that legit it would just be in your face all the time. So me personally, dual Decurion is number 2, and then of course the number 1, you guys already know, it's the Sindus. It's I want to say the second most beautiful arc gun after the Phaedra. Like, look at these barbs that it's got. It's like 4 barbed, and then the whole front of it, when you reload it, just like opens up. It's really fucking cool. It's just a really great looking weapon. But in addition to that, and this is the reason why the Velocitus ended up so low on my list. Number 1, it's a burst fire weapon. It's got a great damage spread. It's got a great status chance. If you use this on ground, it's actually really fucking awesome too. It's really, really accurate, so you can actually snipe enemies just as well as you could with the Velocitus. Now, you're not going to get the big, crazy damage numbers that you would had you used the Velocitus, but guess what? You can use this in close combat. You can fire this off very, very quickly, be really, really accurate. You can fire this on the move. You don't have to charge anything. You're literally just kind of like rampaging through with this weapon, and it's so freaking good. And you guys know that I love me a burst fire weapon. I stand the Hema, I stand the Singus. So for me personally, if you have not tried out the Singus, definitely give this a shot. It is definitely the top of the heap, and I believe I did like a numerical study on this, and this actually ends up as one of the highest damage per second weapons when it comes to being out in space. Now, of course, they have tweaked numbers here and there, so that might not be true now, but when I first released the video, this was definitely up there, if not one of the tip tops. So definitely check this one out just for use in general. It'll make your play in Archwing so much better. Now, I do want to cover a couple things. Oh, maybe we'll leave that for a future video. I feel like I've been rambling long enough as it is. Oh, what is happening here? But legitimately, I want to go ahead. We'll talk about modding next time because there are some interesting things to mod with. But I want to leave you guys a list of mods that you should definitely check out when it comes to just weapons in general. Of course, you're going to need basics like rubido-lined barrels. You're also going to want to check out Sabbat rounds. Now, Sabbat rounds is one of the newer additions, which of course comes from Profit Taker Phase 3. We also have things like Critical Focus, which comes from Profit Taker Phase 4. And then we have Mark Target, which is the status version, which comes from Profit Taker Phase 3. So it's really, really interesting because they have some mods that are, a certain bonus when aiming, and I feel like you're always pretty much aiming when it comes to arc guns. So for Mark Target, it's 120% status chance. I do believe it's multiplicative, so basically whatever your base is, it multiplies that. And then we also have Critical Focus, which is 60% critical chance and 60% critical damage when aiming, and then Sabbat rounds is just like a flat 60% damage plus 3 meters of punch through. So those ones are definitely must-haves. Check those out. Also, Rubido Line Barrel, of course, is your basic kind of like Serration mod. I'm gonna leave a link to the mod listing down in the description below as well, so that you guys, just in case you figure like you need certain mods, you can go there. But maybe we'll talk about modding for this in a future video. So let me know what your list, your list of 9 is down in the comments below. Let me know if you have any ideas for maybe new arc guns that DE could bring in to the Empyrean world. Regardless, that is going to do it for me for now. So as always, love somebody, hurt nobody, and touch your body. Preferably not with a terrible, terrible toilet paper. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.